Hey everybody, my name is Ellie Michaels. I am a autistic, ADHD, transgender, manic pixie dream girl in her middle age. Uh, and today we're going to talk about gender expression as a form of neurodivergent self-care. So we're all here because we understand the hazards of being neurodivergent in a world that's built by and for neurotypicals. We know that masking too hard for too long, pretending you're someone you're not, can and will lead to lasting physical, psychological, and emotional damage to ourselves and everybody in our lives, really. And we know that the damage that burnout can do is just atrocious. So we have safe foods that we eat, we have safe clothing that we wear, and safe shows that we watch in order to help self-regulate and self-soothe when the friction of the world rubbing against our brains gets to be too much. A lot of us have had to make drastic and difficult changes in our lives in order to accommodate and honor our neurodivergent nervous systems. But drastic change is better than drastic burnout any day. So we honor ourselves in these and in other important ways, but let me ask you something. Have you considered if you're honoring yourself with your gender expression? In other words, do you have a safe gender? So, all right, real quick, what do I mean when I say gender? Gender is not sex. Sex has to do with biology and is, of course, way more complicated than the XX and XY that we learned in 5th grade. Most things are more complicated than what we learned in 5th grade. Gender is a performance. It's how you dress, how you talk, and how you act. It sometimes has to do with your biology, but not necessarily. And in some cultures, there's only 2 kinds of performance you can choose from, typically male or female. But in lots and lots and lots of cultures throughout history, there's been more than just the 2 options for gender expression. People who buck gender norms have always been here. The oldest known example of a person that lived as a gender that was different from what they were assigned at birth was from 2900 BCE. The oldest known example of someone that we would consider transgender. She was assigned male at birth, but she was buried in a manner that only females were. So when people say, like, in 1,000 years, when they dig up your skeleton, they'll know you were male. All right, yeah, fine. But they'll also say, clearly, this person's gender identity was actually female, and the people who loved her respected that so much that they even treated her as a real woman in death. And if people in Prague 5,000 years ago could understand gender expression, then I think we can probably get it too. In ancient Rome, the priests of the god Sibyl were exclusively trans women. People who were assigned male at birth, but who were more content and comfortable and happy dressing, acting, and living as women. The god Dionysus was straight up depicted as blurring the lines of traditional gender roles. And part of the rites to honor them was official and sanctioned swapping of gender roles at parties and rituals. And Dionysus wasn't the god of wine necessarily. They were the god of duality and fluidity and transgression and liberation, particularly regarding gender and sexuality. The mythology often depicts them as a figure who challenges traditional norms and embraces diverse forms of love and expression and blurs the lines between tradition and novelty. Ancient Mesopotamians had the god Ishtar, who priests were all non-binary, meaning that their identity didn't fit into either male or female roles. In lots of Native American cultures, there was an official third gender that sometimes we call now two-spirit. It's, again, to describe somebody who doesn't quite fit into the typical gender binary as we think of it. I mean, even the traditional Western gender binary as we think of it isn't static, and it never has been. I mean, for example, which gender do you think of as wearing high heels to show off their legs? Because if you were one of the founding fathers in colonial America, your answer would be obviously men. In fact, most men would wear short pants and tight stockings and high heels to show off their calves, because that was considered attractive. That was sexy. And that was a couple of 100 years ago. And the people who came up with the idea for our country. I've got a meme I want to put in here, or a slide, I guess, since we're being professional. All of these things, all of these individual points on this picture were considered the height of masculine fashion in their day. And that's shifted and changed over and over and over again through the centuries. Gender changes, gender expression changes. And how you express yours does not need to be what your culture taught you it has to be. In fact, it's usually better for your mental and physical health if you express your gender in a way that's comfortable to you rather than what's comfortable for other people. They'll get over it. That's not your problem. So, all right, let's get a little bit deeper. I mentioned people being transgender, but what does that actually mean? Well, transgender typically means that someone's identity does not align with the gender they were assigned at birth. Gender assigned at birth is pretty much just astrology for genitals. You were born under the sign of the penis. This means that you will be drawn to big trucks and you will like crappy beer and enjoy having a beard. You were born under the sign of the vulva. You will like frilly dresses and the color pink and being oppressed. Also, all parents must make sure that they dress their infants with the correct color coding so that strangers know what kind of genitals they have. Blue for infants with penises and pink for infants with vulvas. That's actually really fucked up if you think about it. Well, we all just kind of gotten used to the idea of color coding clothing to tell what kind of junk we have. With the 5 main categories of transgender are male to female, people who were assigned male at birth whose identity aligns more with female, like me or Lana Wachowski. There's also female to male, people who were assigned female at birth whose identity aligns more with being male, like Jamie Raines. Non-binary people are folks who their identity doesn't align with either, and somewhere in the middle or somewhere off there, like Elliot Page. Gender fluid, which is people whose gender identity moves back and forth along the spectrum, like Billy D. Williams. And then there's also agender, people whose identities doesn't really include gender at all. You know, people like my wife or the rapper Angel Hayes. So as for me, like I said, I am transgender male to female. From a biological standpoint, I'm basically a cis woman. Cis means not trans. It's not a slur. It just means not trans. I'm a cis woman whose endocrine system has a birth defect that meant that my body made way more testosterone than is normal. Because yes, cis women's bodies also make testosterone. Everyone does. And the only difference between a female fetus and a male fetus is that testosterone changes the female body into a male one. Thus, I looked like a male for the first 30 years of my life or so. But I always hated performing masculinity. It just never appealed to me. It just wasn't my bag. I didn't like football. I don't like trucks. I hated having facial hair. And right around puberty, as the testosterone really started flowing, my lifelong depression and anxiety kicked into high gear. In my 30s, I figured out what trans people were when I met one. And a couple months later, I went, oh, that's what that is. And it's very similar to finding out you're neurodivergent. All of these little things from your past click into focus, and you go, that's why. Oh. Because it was like Morpheus said in The Matrix. It was a splinter in my mind. And once I changed my gender expression and then eventually went on the correct hormones to make my body work right, I finally removed that splinter out of my mind. I started living. When I say I started living, I mean, I went from 3 core emotions: annoyed, really annoyed, and tearing my face off annoyed. to having the full range of human expression. I had joy and sadness and elation and loss and curiosity and contentment and fury and happy, crushed, optimistic, excited, amazed, insecure, shocked, and all of them. It's amazing. I started liking my body. Colors became more vibrant. Music has emotional weight. Art is more beautiful. Life is actually, finally, really worth living for something other than just, spite. And all of this is because I fixed a very simple biochemical imbalance that my body was born with. Same as treating ADHD, same as treating autism, dyslexia, epilepsy, or any other neurodivergence. But all right, why am I talking about trans stuff in a neurodiversity talk? Well, it's because there's about a 70% overlap of neurodivergence and some form of genderqueer. And personally, I'm convinced that last 30% are just so autistic that they're agender and just don't care at all. And we know the hazards of masking and denying our true identities as neurodivergent people, but the hazards of denying your gender identity can be worse. When transgender people are not allowed to express their true identity, about half of us die by our own hands. When we are allowed to express our truth and honor ourselves, that rate drops to below 10%. And of those, almost universally, the driving factor was the rejection and violence that out trans people face in our society. You've probably heard about detransitioners. And the thing is, yes, great. If you started to transition and found it wasn't for you, I'm so happy that you had the courage to try and then figure out more. But the thing is, that's like less than 2% of trans people. And of the maybe 1.5 million people in the country, that's hardly anybody. And again, of those less than 2%, about 80% of them reported that they detransitioned because of social pressures, because of transphobia, because of violence, because of being ostracized from their community and their families. And then when it comes to gender surgeries, either, top surgery for trans masks to remove their breasts or bottom surgery to reconfigure your genitals to be what feels right and what you know to be what you should have, the regret rate is less than 1%. The regret rate for knee replacement sits at about 10%. And even when the Republican legislature in Utah ran their own study to try and justify banning trans healthcare, they found that unequivocally, across the board, having access to gender-affirming care does not harm people, youth or adults. It improves our quality of life and it reduces the risk of suicide drastically. And no one is performing gender-corrective surgery on kids. Pretty much all gender-affirming care for adolescent people is breast reduction for girls with oversized breasts that cause back pain issues, or breast reductions on male adolescents with gynecomastia, which means when you're, a boy and you're going through puberty, there's another imbalance and you suddenly grow boobs. It happens when there's estrogen in your system. Almost all the other surgeries that you hear about performed on minors, those are performed on the 2% of humans who are born intersex. And they're performed on them as infants, obviously without their consent, so that they align to one side or another of the gender binary. Problem is, this is convenient, but it still causes lasting psychological damage down the line because someone has been forced into being someone and something they're not, which is kind of the theme. Being trans does not harm people. The way that society reacts to people being trans is what hurts us. Just last year, I lost a fellow trans femme friend. Not because she was unhappy with her identity, not because she was unhappy with her transition, but because when she finally had the courage to come out, her family violently disowned her. They disinherited her, and then they attacked and harassed her nonstop for 8 months until she finally died by her own hand. Personally, I haven't talked to anybody I'm related to and getting on for 3 years now. But hey, you know what they say, date a trans girl, you'll never have to meet her parents. Right now in this country and in a bunch of other ones, transgender people are being erased. It is a very tried and true pattern of authoritarian regimes. Genocide always starts with us because to most people, they don't know about us. And then they see us and we don't look quite right. The effects of testosterone on your body are irreversible. My voice sounds like this. It can sound like this because my larynx were exposed to testosterone and they got thicker and it got bigger. If you're wondering, though, why you've never heard of us, a lot of that is because our history has been erased over and over and over again by authoritarian regimes throughout history. There was a place in Germany in the 30s called the Institute for Sexual Study. Actually, it was a German word, it's very long. And the Nazis raided it and burned it down with all of the information and science and history that had been collected there. Trans people were being treated with hormones, just like I am, in 1933. And then it was burned down. It was removed from society because we don't fit in the narrative of the traditional gender binary. And when the basis of your political movement is that there is good and there is bad, there is right and there is wrong, there is woman and there is man, and there is no room in between for either, well, you have to get rid of the outliers because we're proof that that's not true. If you read through the current administration's playbook that they called Project 2025, it outlines the same plan to eliminate us from public life, to prevent us from accessing the medicine we need to survive, to outlaw us from existing at all. In 2023, there were 2,600 pages of leaked emails between anti-LGBT hate groups and Republican lawmakers in which they outlined their plans to exterminate trans people from the US. And they admitted in those plans that they wanted to take out all of LGBT people. Except 10 years ago, we got gay marriage in this country. And a huge reason why we got gay marriage was because we suddenly had Facebook in 2005. And lots of people found out that they did, in fact, know some gay people. And they saw us living our boring, normal lives because that's it. We're just another flavor that humans come in. They said they were going to start with kids' sports. And they've started with kids' sports. Hilariously, too, because in several states where they have enacted bans to keep transgender youth from engaging in sports, they put the laws in place, and then they couldn't find anyone to enforce the laws against. Again, we're like 1.5% of the population. And they say it's about fairness in sports, but Michael Phelps wasn't banned from competing, even though he has a genetic difference that gave him an advantage. There's only like 50 of us. And when they say that hormones don't affect us and that we still have the biology we were born with, I'm sorry, sweetie, but hormones do change your biology. I wasn't born looking like this. I changed into looking like this. After trans sports, they were going to go after trans care for kids. And they are, and they have. And the thing about transitioning as a youth is that no one does surgeries on kids. It's not a thing. I mean, do you even know how hard it is as a kid in school to let the nurse give you aspirin? Let alone, are they going to give you a $30,000 surgery that takes months to recuperate from? It's like the thing of there's litter boxes in classrooms. It's not real. It's made up. But there's legislation against it. After trans youth, they're going to go for trans adults. And they already have. In a lot of parts of this country, it is so unsafe to be a transgender person that you are risking literal death by going there. Florida has enough gotcha laws in place that if you are a trans feminine person, even if you're post-surgery and someone finds you in a bathroom, you can be arrested. And if you don't have your birth certificate on hand, you can still be arrested. There's another law that says that state funds can't be used for gender-affirming healthcare. Well, when you're in jail, all of your healthcare is funded by the state. So they take away your hormones. They forcibly detransition us. And in a lot of cases, they shave our heads. And then they put us in prison with men. And often violent sex offenders, with the hope that violence will be done to us. It's called V-carding. It's a whole thing. It's real. In 2024, there were 617 specifically anti-trans bills submitted to legislatures all over the country. So far in 2025, 6 months in as the recording of this, there have been 942 bills specifically targeting us. So far, there's more than 100 that have gone into law. And in several states, it is now effectively illegal to be a trans person in public without facing arrest. There was one particular law that they called an anti-drag law. And it said that anyone performing in a business as anything other than their assigned gender at birth would be considered drag. And if you were caught as a business letting drag performers exist, you would be fined up to $10,000. Your business would be reclassified as 21 and over only, forever. And you would have to start charging at least a $10 service charge to enter your business. Now imagine you run a grocery store and one of your cashiers is transgender and they're whistling one day while they wipe off their, belt thing. The one that moves the food, not the one on there. That would count. The wording in the bill is specifically so that that would count. That would destroy your business. Okay, granted, a grocery store that's only 21 and over, that might be fun. That'd probably be quiet. Right now, the federal government is threatening to defund any medical facility that takes any federal money, including Medicare, if they so much as admit that trans people exist. Because according to the White House, we don't. We've been scrubbed from every government website, every government report. They don't even say LGBT, they say LGB on purpose. ICE has been instructed to refuse entry into the country for anyone with a gender marker on their paperwork that has changed. And they've started recently screening people who are trying to leave the US to get into Canada, because they know that every trans person in the country has a bag packed right now. And we're all waiting for that last straw to break, for it to be less dangerous for us to leave literally everything and everyone we've ever known than to just stay here and be killed as a matter of public policy. All of this for 2 million adults in a country of more than 300 million people. There's more. There's way more. I know it, but I've had to disengage from keeping track of it all for the sake of my own sanity and mental health. If you really want to learn more, go look up Erin Reed. She's a phenomenal reporter. She's been covering all of this for years. Her Substack is called Erin in the Morning. They say the same thing about us now that they said about gay people 20 years ago. I very distinctly remember my favorite teacher in junior high being the science teacher. And about halfway through the year, someone outed her as being a lesbian. And within 2 days, she was fired. Because gays are pedophiles and gays are groomers, and you can't expose kids to the gays, they'll turn gay. I was exposed to heterosexual stuff my entire life and still turned out queer. But it was legal, so everybody just shrugged and moved on. We had substitute teachers for the rest of the year. Now they say the same thing. Trans people groom kids. We're rapists. We're deviants. The only thing they haven't said so far is that we drink the blood of children. But everything else is right on par with the blood libel they used against the Jews in 1930s Germany. And yet we're still here. We've always been here, and we will always be here. And despite the propaganda, despite the hatred and the violence and the discrimination, we're not backing down, we're not going away, and we're not going to stop being who we are. Because as neurodivergent people, especially, we know how important it is to live authentically, to respect and honor yourself. Just like being a neurodivergent person, there's nothing wrong with who we are. We're not deviant, we're not bad. We're just another flavor that people come in. My mental health is vastly, drastically improved because I changed a few things about how I live my life, about how I express my identity. And it hurts literally no one. Same as wearing earplugs on the bus. Same as not eating that food that has that texture that makes you... So take some time this week. Pride Month is almost over, but think about it for a second. Think about how you express yourself and how you express your gender and how it feels to live as that identity. Don't be afraid to think that maybe who you thought you were isn't quite who you actually are. Maybe the people who told you who you were as a kid didn't actually know. I'm going to keep being me for the rest of my life. That includes the autism, that includes the ADHD, that includes the transness, the queerness, the love of the color purple. Because if you ask anyone who has confronted their identity, neurodivergent, gender expression, music taste, fashion choices, they'll tell you that it's improved their life. And you know it's improved yours. Your mental health, your physical health, your overall well-being. Don't be afraid to poke around and ask, who am I? And what does that look like? Because who you are and how you express who you are is just as important as your diet, your exercise, your sensory input. And nothing can actually change who you are, but you can figure out who you are and what that means and what it looks like. And your life will invariably be better just for asking those questions. Thanks. Happy Pride.